everybody, I'm Kate Cass, and welcome to an edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about Doctor Who some more, because November 23rd commemorates the 60th anniversary of when Doctor Who first hit the airwaves. Ever since, it has entertained generations of viewers, through production difficulties, convoluted plot lines, budget cuts, and even a 16-year hiatus. Doctor Who has persisted to become one of the most iconic science fiction shows in the world, rivaled only by the likes of Star Trek. November is also a significant month for me, as it was around this time 11 years ago that I gave Doctor Who a try. Almost right away, it piqued my curiosity, captured my heart, and quickly became one of my all-time favorite shows. In fact, my fourth favorite show if you go by that favorite TV shows list I made a few years back. Maybe I should update that list. With that being the case, there was no way I was going to let this milestone go by without celebrating it somehow. After a lot of consideration, I decided the most fun thing I could do would be counting down my top 12 favorite episodes. A task which is going to be much more difficult than usual. Like I said, this show's been going on for a long time, since the 1960s. So before we get started, we have to lay down some ground rules. First, this list will admittedly be biased towards the Revive series, since that's what I started with, like most of you did. I will be including some classic series episodes, but keep in mind that while I am decently well-versed in Classic Who, there's still a good amount of it I have not watched. In that same vein, remember that Doctor Who is pretty much always coming out with new episodes, so going back or going forward, this list could change over time. I also made the executive decision to not include any of the anniversary episodes or regeneration episodes. Don't get me wrong, there are some truly phenomenal stories in those categories, but not only do I feel they're more emotional, reactionary episodes, but when I did include them, it took up like a third of the list, and I want to have some variety here. Next, please keep in mind, as is the case with every favorites list, that this is just my opinion. While a lot of these episodes I do truly consider to be great must-watch stories, there's a lot of personal bias with my picks, rather than just picking what most would consider to be the best of the best. So if you don't see stuff like Blink or Heaven Sent on here, which you won't, that's pretty much why. And finally...
Spoilers.
Spoilers. Spoilers.
Obviously, I'll try to dance around any major spoilers concerning these episodes, but everyone is at a different point in their Doctor Who journey, so it's entirely possible that there are spoilers here for someone. I will be leaving time codes in the description for each entry, so if one seems like it'll give something away for you, you can easily skip to the next entry if you'd like. Now, at last, let's count down my top 12 favorite episodes of Doctor Who. But why top 12? Because with this many great ones, you really expect me to only pick 10? It was hard enough to pick 12! Let's kick this list off with... Number 12. Pyramids of Mars. Doctor Who has a lot of episodes that fit into a very specific category. The ones that have those absolutely absurd titles that sound like pulp science fiction, combining both the time and space elements of the show. You know, like dinosaurs on a spaceship.
Dinosaurs on a spaceship.
Mummy on the Orient Express.
I'm the Doctor and I will be your victim this evening. Are you my mummy?
There's a bunch of these. But for my favorite in this category, I went a bit further back and picked my favorite story from the acclaimed 4th Doctor's era, Pyramids of Mars. So get this, Egyptian mythology is not in fact myth, but recounting the history of powerful alien races. Archaeologists unknowingly trigger the process that would unleash the most powerful and vengeful of them all, with the assistance of zombified professors and robot mummies. Yeah, this is what I signed up for with Doctor Who. A lot of classic series episodes can have trouble with pacing or filling up time in a multi-episode story, but Pyramids of Mars might be one of the most well-paced stories I've watched in Classic Who. The threat escalates in a way that keeps the main characters on their toes, enhanced even further by well-introduced character conflict. There's some really interesting moments between the Doctor and Sarah Jane, those times where she's reminded just how alien he really is, and moments where he's trying to put sentimentality aside to make sure no one else dies. It was some pretty dramatic stuff to get from one of the most charismatic and approachable doctors, and the companion deemed the Doctor's best friend. These weren't the kind of conversations I was used to these two having, and that's part of what makes it so good. It's overall just a really good story. But what puts it on my all-time favorites list ahead of episodes I've watched several more times? Simple. Sutekh. Over 40 years later, Sutekh is still, quite possibly, the most terrifying and powerful villain the series has ever created. For the majority of the story, he's imprisoned and immobilized, yet he's able to keep full command of the mission on Earth to free him, controlling a deadly army, reanimating the dead to do his bidding, and dominating the confrontation he eventually has with the Doctor, with moments where no matter how hard he tries, the Doctor is completely at his mercy. It is absolutely terrifying. Sutekh is the kind of villain who does a lot with very little. Just sitting there with that creepy mask and the booming voice of Gabriel Wolf echoing behind it, a voice so scary they later brought him back to play the devil, all while displaying the kind of power that threatens other godlike beings, all of existence, and can incapacitate the Doctor, is more than enough to make for one of the most memorable villains in the show's history. Pyramids of Mars is one of those stories where everything just works really well, with some truly standout elements that make for an iconic experience. Admittedly, there's still a lot of Tom Baker stories I haven't watched, his era is just so long, but of the ones I have, this is easily my favorite episode of the Fourth Doctor's era, and kicks off this list of my all-time favorite episodes.
And I curse you, Sutekh, in the name of all nature. You are a twisted abhorrence.
Number 11. Listen. Okay, this might be the first controversial pick on this list. Listen was very divisive at the time it aired, and how you felt about it seemed to boil down to how much Moffat fatigue you were suffering from at the time. If you were a fan of Stephen Moffat's writing, it was another example of how he can build suspense and construct clever twists. If you weren't a Stephen Moffat fan, this was probably where all of Moffat's signature tropes became too much for you to deal with. I'm a pretty well-known Moffat defender / apologist. Heck, I dedicated an entire year to covering Sherlock, 85% of which in a positive light, so I pretty instantly love this episode. Isn't Moffat still digging into his bag of tricks? Oh yeah, but in this case, they still serve him well. The way it builds up this tension of what it would be like to be pursued by a creature that can hide perfectly is really well realized as the paranoia builds for both the Doctor and the audience. Well, some of the audience. The others were busy saying that creatures like the Weeping Angels and the Silence already achieve so-called perfect hiding, which they don't. Because we know about them. There are ways of detecting these monsters, even if it's difficult. If they're perfect at hiding, then what would these creatures be? More perfect?
There's no such thing as more perfect. You're either perfect or you're not.
The whole point of this episode is to explore that primal fear, that sense of the unknown creeping deeper and deeper into your mind, trying to fight it with tactic after tactic that you're not even sure will work. The events of the episode offer a logical explanation for all the incidents that frighten or hurt the characters in the story, but is it logic? Or is it rationalizing? That's what's so clever about the approach this story takes. A lot of debate when this episode aired boiled down to whether there was a perfect hiding creature there or not. But in my opinion, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. What's out there to be afraid of doesn't matter nearly as much as how you process and deal with that fear of the unknown. I'm someone on the spectrum who suffers from anxiety, so deep down, pretty much everything terrifies me, from worst case scenarios concocted by my own brain to looking someone in the eye. So to have someone on this show I love so much tell a character who would go on to become someone so brave and inspiring that fear is a superpower and that's nothing to be ashamed of? I don't know, even though I was 21 at the time, it really affected me and it's been a helpful thing to remember over the years. I gained a lot of new perspective from Listen, not just from the content of the episode itself, but also the reception towards it. I heard very comprehensive, well laid out arguments from people who loved it and hated it, some of which from people whose work I admire and opinions I respect. Listen taught me that two people can look at the exact same thing and see something wildly different, which is valid and important. What's the correct viewpoint? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe it doesn't matter. What really matters is to listen.
Because didn't anybody ever tell you? Fear is a superpower.
Number 10. The Haunting of Villa Diodati. If there is one thing the 13th Doctor's era absolutely excels at, it's historical episodes. Practically every single one of them was an absolute home run. Everything from the atmosphere to the casting to writing a scenario that would be tough for the Doctor to confront in that time period, they were some of the best adventures back in time in the show's history. I knew I had to include one on my favorites list. I considered Rosa, Demons of the Punjab, even Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror for the spot, but then I remembered, oh yeah, I'm biased. The Doctor and fam wander onto the summer estate of Lord Byron on the dark and stormy night where Mary Shelley conceived the story of Frankenstein. Gimme, gimme, gimme. The atmosphere is strong with this one, taking place in this gothic lakeside house with that endless storm beating outside, along with the interior shifting and separating the characters for long stretches of time. It's nothing the show hasn't done before, but they utilize it incredibly well, with fantastic, creepy imagery punctuating the mystery and terror. But that doesn't mean it doesn't take the time to have some fun or get to know these people who have gone down in history. One of the reasons the Chibnall era was so great at tackling historical stories is that it really got to the root of who these people really were. Not just monoliths of innovation and social change, but people with wants and fears and questions and desires just like everyone else. I always appreciate when Doctor Who goes the extra mile like that. Although Lord Byron constantly coming onto the Doctor is kind of weird, but honestly, I'm just kind of glad that didn't happen way more often with our first female Doctor. But the relationships that are challenged the most during this outing are between the Doctor and her companions. The 13th Doctor has had a very chill and loving relationship with her fam, with the show trying its best to have them work and feel like an equal team. This is the first time that team dynamic is challenged. The companions can't make the tough calls here. The Doctor has to. Once again, standing alone as the oldest and mightiest being in the room when deep down, all she wants to be is another member of a family.
Because sometimes this team structure isn't flat. It's mountainous, with me at the summit, in the stratosphere, alone.
It's powerful stuff, and it's a real shame it doesn't play too much of a role in the episodes that follow. It gives a great parallel between the Doctor and the monster for this episode, a lone, half-converted Cyberman. Again, not a new idea for this franchise. I think Torchwood did something similar and went in a different direction design-wise, but man, Ashad is so creepy. This might be one of my new favorite villains in the series. It's such a good concept, made even stronger in the presence of Mary Shelley. And I don't think I would have gotten that kind of reaction out of a traditional Cyberman. The Haunting of Villa Diodati offers a lot of things that are very appealing to me personally. It's probably the most morally questionable the 13th Doctor is in her entire run, and if you are well-versed enough in expanded Who media, it's a good demonstration of how different writers can tackle similar plots and ideas and tell very different but very good stories, right alongside the likes of Human Nature, ultimately resulting in a conflict between two beings, powerful and alone, facing off at the summit. As a big Doctor Who and Frankenstein fan, I don't think I could have asked for something better.
You didn't want to be this way. They hurt you. This modern Prometheus.
Certainly better than when the War Doctor met Mary Shelley.
Percy and Byron preach free love. I practice it.
Moving on. Number 9. Edge of Destruction. Yeah, we're going way back for this one. You ever see those posts that ask, what is the most underrated Doctor Who episode? Whenever I see that question, this is always my go-to answer. What makes Edge of Destruction underrated? Well, it's a 2-part episode in the first Doctor's era, so that already makes it something of a unicorn in an era filled with 6 to 8 or even 10-part storylines. But it also had the slight misfortune of coming out right after the debut of a certain iconic monster. So the children of the UK were a bit too wrapped up in Dalek Mania to really care about the bottle episode. But when I watched it on this DVD collection I picked up to see how the show began, I found myself blown away by just how monumental this episode was. It's got a really intriguing setup. Something in the TARDIS makes the Doctor and his companions go mad. The Doctor is injured and becomes increasingly paranoid, Ian and Barbara have their own lapses in memory, and Susan straight up tries to kill them a couple of times. It's terrifying. I love it! It has a real Rod Serling vibe to it. Things get stranger and more disorienting, and the characters don't know what's happening or how to stop it. The early episodes of Doctor Who did a pretty good job at making situations so difficult that it can get tougher to see how the main cast is going to get out of it, and this is no exception. What really cements Edge of Destruction as one of my favorite episodes, though, is how it resolves. I'm not going to go into what exactly happened in the story to cause all this, because 1, I want to encourage people to track this episode down for themselves, and 2, it's kind of weird, but what's truly significant is that solving this mystery makes the Doctor realize for the first time that the TARDIS is alive. That it's not just a ship, but a fellow companion, looking out for her passengers as best she can. It's really exciting in hindsight to watch this epiphany be reached. Despite the first Doctor's reputation for being forgetful and neglectful, this episode makes all of that a pivotal part of the story. How little he knows at this point in time, and how much he will learn on this millennia-long journey he's embarked on. The Doctor also gains some new perspective from his companions, who, rather directly, and I think most would agree justifiably, calls the Doctor out for how badly he's been treating them.
Gratitude's the last thing you'll ever have, or any sort of common sense either.
That burn was brought to you by the letter S, as in snap.
Remember, these are the Doctor's first companions, who were technically kidnapped, but they've now had terrifying and remarkable experiences together, gotten into deadly situations that if they weren't all working together, they wouldn't have made it out of. Edge of Destruction is where the Doctor-companion relationship is defined and solidified, where the Doctor understands how important it is for these humans to be there alongside him and how we should appreciate them more. It's one of the stories that reminds you that despite the fact that the Doctor is played by the oldest actor to play the role, currently, this is when he was at his youngest, selfish and inexperienced. It feels like a major turning point for the show character-wise, where the Doctor starts to be more empathetic, where the TARDIS's true power and ability is first realized, and where the Doctor-companion relationship becomes something more special. On top of that, the scenario is gripping and the performances are stellar, with William Hartnell getting a monologue that is perhaps the best performance of his entire tenure. This story, written in 2 days to fill in a production gap, compensating for the budget that the Daleks ate up, left an impact that is still felt in the show to this day. It changed the direction of the Doctor and strengthened his connection to his companions and his ship.
A new birth of a sun and its planets.
Speaking of which, number 8. The Doctor's Wife. During the Doctor's time traveling through time and space, they've of course had many companions, but there's always been one constant companion through it all. The TARDIS itself. While the Doctor grew to understand the TARDIS better, see it as a living thing and treat it like one, even talking to it from time to time, the TARDIS is the kind of companion who can never talk back. Until this episode. It's the kind of premise where once you hear it, it's hard to believe that it took the show this long to tackle it. But it's also the kind of story you only get one shot at. If the TARDIS had a voice beyond this episode, it wouldn't feel as special. So if they were going to tackle this premise, they needed to do it right. And as you might have guessed from the fact that it's on this list, I think they really did. Admittedly, it does take a little while for the Doctor to discover what happened while the audience finds out right away. However, once the Doctor discovers who this woman is now, played by insert Helena Bonham Carter look-like Joe Keir Saran Jones, it takes full advantage of the scenario it's created. Suddenly, these two beings who have traveled together for hundreds of years can air out their grievances like an old married couple attending counseling, and the observations here can be absolutely hilarious.
There's a sign on my front door. You have been walking past it for 700 years. What does it say?
Pull to open.
Yes, and what do you do?
I push.
Every single time. 700 years.
But it's not just for laughs. Neil Gaiman really gets to the root of what this relationship really is, getting to hear the TARDIS' side of the story and how she wanted to travel just as much as the Doctor did. Who really stole who here? It's really interesting stuff, elevated by just how well Smith and Jones convey these feelings that have been building for centuries. This isn't just a big deal for the audience or even the Doctor, but for the TARDIS as well. And the episode acknowledges that in mostly fun, but also incredibly heart-wrenching ways. Her last last words to him before she goes back where she belongs are wonderful and devastating, and my god, Matt Smith in this moment absolutely destroys me every single time. That man could really convey devastating loss with just a look. This would be enough to make The Doctor's Wife one of the most memorable outings in the series, but if the episode was just that, it could be seen as just a fun gimmick. Thankfully, the stakes are kept high with the TARDIS being put in jeopardy, with the ship itself being hijacked by a TARDIS-eating entity, with the Doctor's companions still inside. It adds an extra horror element to the episode, as Amy and Rory try to navigate the infamous space and time machine, while this thing controlling it is trying to kill them. Also, fun fact, I was today years old when I found out that said psychopathic entity is played by Michael Sheen.
Fear me, I've killed hundreds of Time Lords.
Oh, good lord.
Ever since seeing this episode, I've never heard those thrums and beeps inside this ship quite the same way again. Neil Gaiman and Doctor Who already sounds like a match made in heaven, and it 100% was. The Doctor's Wife is proof of how a show that's been going for so long can still tap into long-established relationships, tackle them in a new way, and create something truly special from it. The Doctor is able to travel in all of time and space because of the TARDIS. All the other companions may come and go, but the one constant companion is and always will be this silly blue box who ran away with him.
I'll always be here. But this is when we talked.
Number 7. World Enough in Time and the Doctor Falls. I personally think the 12th Doctor's era really struggled when it came to its season-long story arcs. After the likes of Death in Heaven and Hell Bent, while I was looking forward to Series 10, I wasn't getting my hopes up about its ongoing storyline. Which is why I was pleasantly surprised when The World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls was so great, it became my favorite episode of the 12th Doctor's era. So, yeah, sorry, that's it for him on this list. First off, it has a fantastic concept, landing on this massive ship getting closer to a black hole that causes time to fluctuate inside. So the closer you are to the black hole, the faster time goes. It's such an amazing idea for a Doctor Who episode, where years are passing by on one end of the ship, and on the other, the Doctor is still expositing about what's happening here. It takes full advantage of its setting and concept, and even mixes in a truly disturbing look at the origin of the Cybermen, watching in real time how they became what they did. It's the kind of story where just as you have one horrifying realization, there's another slowly building up in the background waiting to shock you again. On top of that, it's also a multi-master story, the first in the show's history, surprisingly, and boy did they take advantage of it. I've always been pretty fond of Missy, and this might just be my favorite appearance by John Simm as the Master. It carries his trademark boisterous egotism with some classic series traits sprinkled in, resulting in a truly expert reveal that would have been one of the best in the entire series if the BBC hadn't ruined it in the promos. By the time the Doctor Falls starts up, a lot has happened and a lot is happening. However, this might be one of the most brilliantly executed stories when it comes to juggling all these elements so none overpower each other and work well alongside each other. The only thing that gets undermined somewhat is maybe the Cybermen, and who cares? I don't. Seeing the Doctor and Bill be put through the ringer with all they suffer through in the story, but no matter how scared they are, they stay strong for each other. Watching Missy's inner conflict after going through a pretty decent character arc over Series 10, now faced with her younger self, who she used to be, and if that's still who she wants to be. But let's be honest, when I first mentioned this episode, there's one scene you all immediately thought of: the Doctor's mission statement.
I do what I do because it's right, because it's decent, and above all, it's kind. It's just that.
This might be one of the greatest moments, if not the greatest moment, that Stephen Moffat has written for Doctor Who. Moments like this are where his love for the show and this character truly shine, with Peter Capaldi, another longtime fan of the show, declaring these words, stating that he is a man who doesn't get involved because he wants to prove some form of dominance, but just because it's the right thing to do. For as big and eternal and important as the Doctor is as a character, when you get to the true core of who he is and what he does, it really is that simple. It has this somber beauty to it, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, on the verge of regeneration, the Doctor will stand up for his beliefs firmly if it means even just a handful of innocent people will be saved. An attitude he ignites in the people who walk alongside him, and that is the very thing that will make the universe a better place. It's such a bittersweet bookend to the 12th Doctor's era, wallowing in death and destruction and loss after loss, but instilled with a sense of hope at the end of it all. The 12th Doctor's era was one filled with tragedy and destruction and questionable moral and writing choices, but it gave me such a sense of relief for Capaldi and Moffat to go out on one of the best season finales of the revived series, and my personal favorite, reminding us that no matter how far the Doctor falls, he will always stand again, because that's just who he is.
Who I am. It's where I stand, It's where I fall.
Number 6. Remembrance of the Daleks. Hands down my favorite Dalek episode. If you want to see the classic series equivalent of a blockbuster story, this is it. For you see, this isn't your typical Dalek invasion, it's a war between two Dalek factions, both after the same thing, and in true Dalek fashion, will destroy anything in their path to get it. It makes the situation more volatile than usual, as the interference from the Doctor and his allies are just seen as roadblocks towards the Daleks' real goals, making every encounter more dangerous than the last, usually resulting in some of the best cliffhangers the show's ever done. Perhaps the most terrifying tactic from the Daleks this time, though, is that they conquered the stairs for the first time. We're doomed. When it comes to action, there's nothing quite like Remembrance in the classic series, with breakneck action scenes, usually with lots of explosions. It raises the tension significantly, and on a visceral level, it's just really cool to watch. If you know this episode for anything, it's probably this scene where the Doctor's companion Ace wails on a Dalek with a baseball bat. Now that's a companion. As well as this being Ace's first proper adventure as the Doctor's companion, and showing off their unique and beloved dynamic beautifully, this is one of Sylvester McCoy's best outings as the Doctor. The key feature of the 7th incarnation of the Doctor was this chess master way of dealing with ongoing threats. He was always about 5 steps ahead, and whenever he fell behind just a bit, he'd be able to get back in the game unassumingly with almost scary precision. That's the case here, as the Doctor works his way around these warring Dalek factions and the humans involved with their own motivations, all while not giving away his own true intentions. It makes this a cerebral battle as well as a physical one. A lot of the plot revolves around callbacks to the very first episode of the show and diving deeper into Time Lord history, since this was the story that kicked off Doctor Who's 25th anniversary, like why the Doctor was in 1963 London in the first place. Apparently it wasn't just for Susan's education. With some compelling hints towards the Doctor's past that was teased quite a bit during Andrew Cartmell's time as showrunner. Remembrance of the Daleks is a blockbuster event, but it's not all laser blasts and baseball bats. Every action from every character has deeper meaning. It's an all-out war, with each side thinking they've got the upper hand, caught up in their own self-imposed superiority just long enough for the Doctor to truly show his hand. Plus, it's packed with references. Like, even to the future, when you really think about it, this was probably the inciting incident of the Time War. It's a great celebration of Doctor Who's history up to that point, a thrilling Dalek story, and just an all-around exciting and well-structured story on its own. It's always my go-to recommendation for new Who fans who want to give the classic series a try, because if this doesn't hook them and reel them in, nothing will.
Unimaginable power, unlimited rice pudding, etc., etc.
Number 5. The 11th Hour. When you're a Doctor Who fan, you probably get this question all the time from non-fans. Where do I start watching the show? Now, this is an important question because Doctor Who is such a long-running and expansive show, it can be intimidating to figure out where to start. I personally believe that Doctor Who is much more accessible than it appears at first, and while there's no perfect place to jump in, there are a few wrong answers too. For instance, I started with this episode, The 11th Hour. Because I didn't have any Doctor Who loving friends at the time, or any friends for that matter, I did my own research on where to start. Thanks to Sherlock, I was a fan of Stephen Moffat as a writer. Thanks to Dr. Hooves, I knew enough about the concept of regeneration to know that starting with a new Doctor would be ideal. Matt Smith was the current Doctor at the time, and it was what my cable package had available on demand. So it was perfect. But it worked out for the best because I truly think that the 11th Hour is one of the best Doctor introduction episodes of the entire series. In fact, I could probably make an argument for it being the best. As soon as Matt Smith crashes into the series, he immediately conveys the eccentric, otherworldly mannerisms of the Doctor. This was a really demanding first outing for Smith. The Doctor is scatterbrained, stoic, rude, gentle, lost, and commanding, but it's perfectly presented and an excellent showcase of what he's able to bring to the role, especially with such a popular act to follow. Same goes for Moffat. With this first episode as showrunner, he's conceived original ways to tackle stories in this generation-spanning franchise. The shining example of this is the introduction of Amy Pond. I cannot tell you how astonished I was to look through Doctor Who's history after the fact and realize no one had ever thought of a backstory like Amy's before. Someone who met the Doctor when she was very young and grew up with him as an imaginary friend until one day he returned when she was all grown up. It's almost magical for a sci-fi series, and that's part of what makes it so charming, giving us an adventure that feels fresh and exciting to newcomers and longtime fans alike. And that's more or less the entire mission the 11th Hour sets out to accomplish. Throughout the episode, the Doctor is fighting against a hostile alien threat and hostile alien police with a kettle and some string, while at the same time rediscovering himself from the inside out, making the now iconic final confrontation with the Atraxi immensely significant. If you were a Doctor Who fan beforehand, it was the epic moment where after much disorientation, the Doctor was back. If you were new like me, it's a grand moment where I truly felt the weight and power of who this character was and the long legacy that this was just the latest chapter of. This moment and the 11th Hour solidified Matt Smith as a part of that legacy, making the beginning of a brand new journey on the show and the beginning of my journey with the show. For such a landmark episode that still holds up after all this time, the least I can do is celebrate it almost 11 years later, how about that, with a spot on this list. For the simple reason that without it, this list wouldn't exist. All of time and space, everything that ever happened or ever would, this is where I started, and I never look back.
Hello. I'm the Doctor.
Number 4. Midnight. You'll notice that there hasn't been anything on here from the 10th Doctor yet. That's because there's a lot of times where episodes in the David Tennant era just fall a little flat for me. Don't misunderstand me. There are some truly remarkable and iconic episodes during Tennant's run, with moments and quotes I'll remember forever, and a lot of the show's success in the new millennium is owed to him. Maybe it's because I didn't start with the 10th Doctor, or that it always bothers me when people dismiss other incarnations of the Doctor or the show because it doesn't revolve around David Tennant, but I just don't look at it with the same rose-colored glasses many others do. A lot of episodes were considered for this list, but whenever I thought of one, something else would manage to take its spot. However, there was one episode starring the 10th Doctor that made the list without a moment's hesitation. Midnight. Now, Midnight is one of those episodes that is praised whenever I hear people talk about it, but people don't talk about it often enough. You could classify Midnight as a base Under Siege story, but it's one of the most unique and terrifying of this subgenre for the program. With the Doctor being trapped in a situation with nothing but a group of ordinary humans around him, and something that's gotten inside the cabin that they cannot confront, identify, or even communicate with. It's an incredibly simple but brilliant premise that keeps you glued to the screen as the situation becomes more uncertain, and as a result, the passengers become more hostile. Usually the way a Doctor Who story goes, the Doctor drops in on a life-threatening situation where no one knows what's going on, he takes the lead, and everyone just trusts him and goes along with what he says.
You're taking orders from him. Spooky, isn't it?
But in this case, not so much. Everyone becomes so paranoid that the fact that the Doctor is taking charge and trying to get everyone to cooperate makes him look suspicious. It's an amazing twist on expectations, making the outcome far less certain than usual, all accomplished in such a minimalist way, taking place in this one cramped location, and the only thing this creature seems capable of doing is repeating what it hears. But that's enough to scare these vacationers so badly that they're willing to throw multiple people to their death to ensure their own safety. It feels akin to famous Twilight Zone episodes like The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, where the slightest thing that is remotely out of place is enough for these ordinary people to fear for their lives. And the Doctor trying to lord his own experiences over them is only making things worse. because even if he's trying to help, who's more unknown than the Doctor? Combined with the increased tension in Russell T Davies' dialogue, some truly expert lighting work changing the single cabin to fit the mood perfectly, and really unnerving and heart-pounding performances, the whole package is just absolutely incredible. It's a kind of story that depicts just how little most people know about the other people around them, and that if maybe we took the time to get to know them a bit better, we wouldn't fear not knowing. This is where I think the 10th Doctor was at his strongest, where all that confidence he exudes was put in check and challenged, where being the last of the Time Lords doesn't carry the weight he thinks, and where, as cool as it is to see him charge into action with a plan, some monsters are tougher to fight. As of the making of this video, it might be my favorite thing Russell T Davies ever wrote for Doctor Who, which easily makes it one of my all-time favorite episodes.
If we're going to get out of this, then you need me. So you keep saying you've been repeating yourself more than her.
Number 3. Battlefield. This one's just fun. Like, there is some stronger significance to why I included Battlefield in this list, especially this high, but the main reason is that it's just a really, really fun story. I mean, come on. The main threats are Arthurian-era knights from another universe, armed with swords and laser blasters. How is that not one of the most awesome things you've ever heard? I'm already a sucker for anything that plays into Arthurian legends, so that was an easy sell for me. There's also the interesting recurring mystery where these knights mistake the Doctor for Merlin. The further they go into unraveling the mystery behind where these knights came from and what they're after, the more it seems like the Doctor might indeed be Merlin. Or at least will be in the future. That's such a cool idea. It makes so much sense. I cannot believe the show hasn't revisited this since. If Big Finish or someone has done something with the Doctor being Merlin, please let me know. But the Doctor and Ace aren't fighting this threat alone. Battlefield might have one of the strongest supporting casts I've seen in a classic series story. The various Arthurian knights, the soldiers at Unit, even the residents at a local inn the cast used to regroup in, are all absolutely wonderful and memorable, and each managed to contribute to the story. But easily, the most significant returning character is Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart. While Nicholas Courtney would reprise his iconic role for charity specials, Big Finish, and even appear in the Sarah Jane Adventures, this was his final appearance on Doctor Who, and as far as I'm concerned, it's one of his best. This is what really endeared me to the Brigadier, someone who would stand alongside the Doctor with utmost trust, but wouldn't think twice about going against his wishes, whom the Doctor still admires and respects. It's a wonderful dynamic and reminded people that under his gruff exterior, the Brig is a very warm and noble ally to our renegade Time Lord. It also comes with a lot of fun callbacks to the Doctor's past with Unit, and that is always a plus. Battlefield is an aptly titled story because many of its central characters are old warriors, having seen and participated in years upon years of conflict, being tempted to take drastic measures to win, but displaying what it truly means to fight with virtue, integrity, and honor. Oh, and anyone who thinks Doctor Who only recently got political, here's a clip from 1989 where the Doctor decries nuclear war.
All over the world, fools are poised, ready to let death fly. Not a war between armies, not a war between nations, but just death. Death gone mad.
Battlefield has got a little bit of everything that makes for a great Doctor Who episode. The pace is brisk, the characters are diverse and endearing, the story is really out there, but grounded enough to take it seriously when the stakes get high, it utilizes the show's history excellently, and it has something meaningful to say. The only downside is that it's a great episode, the first of many in this season, but it wound up leaving less of an impact since this was the last season of Doctor Who before the show went on what would be a 16-year hiatus. Want a tragic bit of trivia? This story is the very last time we see the TARDIS interior in the classic series. You want to know why it's so dark? Because they were already tearing the set down. Good gracious, that is depressing. Battlefield is proof that even in its final days, Doctor Who was still telling bold stories in the middle of grand adventures. I stumbled across it accidentally online about 10 years ago, and I've loved it ever since. It cemented Sylvester McCoy as my second favorite Doctor, and it's still my favorite episode from Classic Who. Number 2. The Rings of Akaten. Oh man, do I love this episode. I mean, no duh, right? It's number 2. But it's possible I've rewatched The Rings of Akaten more than any other episode of Doctor Who on this list, even my number 1. I think the reason for that is that it just feels so lively and has such a big heart at its center. You've got the Doctor taking Clara on her first journey into space, and it's a really good one. I love this bustling marketplace filled with alien creatures of all shapes and sizes. Are the costumes on the cheap side? Maybe a bit, but this is Doctor Who. Part of its charm is that sometimes it looks like it's put together with spit and a prayer. And I like that a lot of these designs are more out there than usual. It sells the fantasy better. A lot of this episode's appeal for me in its first half is just getting acquainted with the culture of Akaten. It's one thing to drop in and visit another planet, but to go in depth on how things of sentimental value are incorporated into everything from ceremonies to currency, it always made Akaten feel much more alive than most places on the show, and it's why I'm always eager to revisit it. But where the episode truly excels is in its second half, where things go wrong and those beliefs are challenged, depicting how beings high up will manipulate those subservient to them into sacrificing more and more for some sense of greater good, and how the Doctor and Clara step in to help them reclaim those beliefs for themselves. Like I said a few entries back, the way Doctor Who typically goes, the Doctor drops in on a crisis and takes charge, and The Rings of Akaten is a great example of how that can inspire others to find their own strengths where they couldn't before. Sometimes all it takes for someone to stand up for themselves is someone to offer them a hand getting there. Then, of course, there's the speech. If you want to know why 11 is my favorite Doctor, aside from him being my first, it's mostly because of moments like this. Despite the fact that Matt Smith is the youngest actor to play the role, he could brilliantly portray this character who has lived for over 1,000 years. I never had trouble believing he was an alien who had lived such a long life, and nothing depicts that better than this speech. It's so grand and powerful and easily one of the highlights of the 11th Doctor's run. I do think The Rings of Akaten as an episode often gets overlooked, but the same cannot be said for this scene. Several fans have made some truly beautiful covers, reenactments, and tributes to the long song and the Doctor's part in it. I even did one myself during my days making Doctor Who's animatics with ear-piercing audio quality.
Knowledge that will make parasites God's play!
But even with how big and important the Doctor is, that still might not be enough to save the day. Having Clara deliver the final blow, so to speak, in her first proper adventure is hugely significant and a perfect demonstration of why the Doctor-companion relationship is so essential for all parties involved. Finding a clever and non-violent solution against what feel like impossible odds. Sometimes, all it takes for someone to stand up for themselves is someone to offer them a hand getting there. The Rings of Akaten isn't just peak Doctor Who, it's peak sci-fi. Realizing the significance of metaphysical things like memory, sentimentality, its significance, and the endless possibilities of the universe and our time in it in a tangible way. I still feel the impact of all of those things every time I watch this truly unforgettable adventure. Only one episode of Doctor Who could possibly top this one in my eyes, but before we go into that, let's quickly go over some honorable mentions. The Girl in the Fireplace. It killed me to cut this from the list. It's a fantastic story for the 10th Doctor, and one of my favorites of this era. An excellent blend of the time and space concept of Doctor Who, wrapped in an adventurous and heartfelt story. You could tell that a lot of the ideas Moffat would use as showrunner were planted here, and in that context, and even on its own, it's absolutely brilliant. Dalek. Sorry, Ninth Doctor fans, this was another tough cut. The first Dalek story of the revival, and in my opinion, still the best. This single Dalek is more terrifying than any fleet that's invaded, and that's what makes it so great. It re-established the Daleks as a credible threat, and it's one of Eccleston's most challenging outings as a Doctor. A challenge he meets with high marks. 10 out of 10. The Pandorica opens, and the Big Bang. The 11th Doctor's first season finale adventure has some of the highest stakes in the series' history, some of the best, most shocking twists, some of the most heartbreaking performances, all centered around our central cast and how close they become in this first season together. It's absolutely beautiful. Only thing that kept it from this list was that I accidentally skipped the Big Bang on my first watch through, so that lessened the impact on a personal level. Thanks a lot, Comcast. Genesis of the Daleks. Man, Man, people are gonna be so mad that I placed Remembrance and Pyramids of Mars over this iconic story. While those episodes did grab me a bit more, Genesis of the Daleks more than earns its reputation as one of the most impressive and important stories the show ever told, with a truly chilling look into the Daleks' origins, accompanied by strong moral debates with no easy answers. If you're a Doctor Who fan, Genesis is essential to see at least once. Demons of the Punjab. Yet another testament to how exceptional the Chibnall era was at tackling historical stories, dropping the Doctor and fam into this deeply tragic but often overlooked part of history to really get to know a couple of the people involved. It's bold, educational, and incredibly emotional. Sydney Newman would be proud. The Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion, aka what Secret Invasion wishes it was. That's it, that's the tweet. Don't think I need to elaborate beyond that. Because now, we've reached the big one. And my number one favorite episode of Doctor Who is Vincent and the Doctor. A historical tale with inventive incorporation of sci-fi elements, exploring an often neglected part of the human condition in a way that can surely stick with an audience? Yeah, that pretty much checks every box to get me to love an episode. Anyone who's talked to me much about Doctor Who knows this is my favorite episode, so sorry if that kind of killed the suspense getting here, but I'm hardly alone in holding it so highly. So often I see Vincent and the Doctor rank high in best of lists and dominating polls centered around the greatest episodes of Doctor Who. And for good reason. Vincent Van Gogh may just be the most tragic historical figure to run into the Doctor, and the episode doesn't shy away from that. The distinct contrast between standing in a museum full of people admiring his work, followed by the same man getting tossed onto the street and called insane, it's really effective at, and sorry for using the simile so soon, painting a picture at how different Van Gogh's life was compared to his legacy. That's not to say in its entirely somber tale. One of the things that made Vincent Van Gogh such an outcast and such a genius was how he saw the world, and the episode incorporates that into the alien threat of the week that only Vincent can see. It's such an organic way to build a Doctor Who story around a historical figure, and the Doctor and Amy do their best to help him, in more ways than one. The two grow pretty close to Vincent in the couple of days they spend with him. It's a magnificently written relationship between the three because it has some truly funny moments and exchanges.
I remember watching Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel. I kept saying to him, look, if you're scared of heights, you shouldn't have taken the job, mate.
And depressing realizations. It's one thing to read or watch something about a historical figure, but this episode depicts the double-edged sword of walking through history. The Doctor and Amy run into this amazing, manic man as he's struggling with mental health issues and inner demons that will lead to him taking his own life mere months from when they drop in. This is obviously a sensitive topic to tackle, especially revolving around a real person who lived in a time where understanding of mental illness was lacking, let's say. But Richard Curtis, yes, that Richard Curtis, depicts it in a way that's delicate but very real. The Doctor and Amy know Vincent's fate, so they're gonna be the best they can be to him while they're in his life, because that's the least he deserves. The locations depicted in Van Gogh's artwork are beautifully realized in the set design and location shots. Tony Curran is absolutely spectacular as Van Gogh. Smith and Gillen work really well alongside him. The eventual resolution towards dealing with the alien is tragically empathetic, and the last 10 minutes or so are perfection. No matter what people have to offer the world or what they deal with on a daily basis, Vincent and the Doctor shows how important it is to let people know the impact they leave, because we don't know how long they'll be here for. Maybe the things that are bad will win out in the end, but that in no way means it's not worth it to try and brighten every day that comes, because those moments of kindness and inspiration and appreciation are what life is all about. Vincent and the Doctor is a phenomenal episode that truly showed me what Doctor Who was capable of. It wasn't just about time traveling and aliens, it was about how everyone is important, even if they don't realize it. And maybe if they're lucky, a special Raggedy Man in a flying blue box will show them that. It is the one episode of the show that I have no hesitations recommending to everyone.
I've seen many things, my friend, but you're right. Nothing quite as wonderful as the things you see.
It's my favorite episode of Doctor Who, and that is really saying something, because this quirky little sci-fi series has told many fun, impactful, and straight-up remarkable stories over its 60-year history. With absolutely no sign of slowing down, and the future looking more ambitious than ever, I imagine there will only be more amazing stories to tell as time and space goes by. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what some of your favorite episodes of Doctor Who are in the comments below. That's why the series is called Let's Talk About. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including Chelsea Crandall, David L. Sproul, Hawk Hero, Jinx Productions, Wait in the Wings, and Michael Gleason, whose name I'm going to say this time because I know he's a big Doctor Who fan. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to check out any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.